The basement air hung thick with the scent of aged paper and faint mildew, dust motes swirling in the narrow beam from my flashlight. I paused mid-step, the wooden floor creaking under my weight, when a sharp gasp echoed from the restricted stacks. Raw. Unraveling. There she was, the CEO, Elena Voss. Her usual tailored sharpness undone, curled against a shelf with hands pressed to her face, shoulders shaking. Her polished world had cracked open in this forgotten corner, and something in me tugged hard, a quiet urge to bridge the silence. But I hesitated, heart thudding. Intervene and risk everything, or fade back into the shadows? As my hand steadied her trembling shoulder, the warmth cut through the chill. My days blurred into the archive's hush, fingers tracing faded ink on letters yellowed by decades, each one a whisper of lives tucked away. Burnout settled like dust on my skin, heavy in the quiet hours after closing, when the city lights flickered distant through high windows. I cataloged alone, the weight pressing. Overlooked histories, queer edges hidden in margins, much like my own. I'd learned early to guard them, after judgments that slice like cold wind, leaving scars under my flannel shirts and calloused hands from endless sorting. Upstairs, her commands filtered down like frost. Elena Voss, the new CEO overseeing our historic library's efficiency review, strode through boardrooms with clicked words and eyes that measured value in dollars. I'd glimpsed her once, passing the reference desk, her suit sharp as a ledger, voice carrying orders for cuts that echoed through the halls. Whispers spread among the staff, sale imminent, our collections scattered to private buyers, the building gutted for condos. I felt it in my gut, a resolve hardening like silt in a riverbed. These shelves held more than books. They preserved fragments of us, the unspoken stories I'd pieced together in stolen moments, validating what the world often erased. That evening stretched long, rain pattering against the panes as I lingered past shift, thermos of coffee steaming faint in the dim reading room. Fatigue tugged at my eyelids, but the restricted stacks called, a hunch about an old donor file that might sway the board. Footsteps soft on the stairs, I descended into the basement's cool embrace, air thick with the must of forgotten volumes. The flashlight beam danced over spines cracked with age, my breath steady against the quiet. Then the gasp shattered it. Heart slamming, I froze behind a row of crates, peering through shadows. Elena knelt there, back to me, breaths ragged, one hand clutching a ledger as if it anchored her. Her free arm wrapped tight around her middle, body folding in on itself, tremors rippling like aftershocks. I'd heard rumors of her drive, the endless mergers that built her empire, but this, raw unraveling in our hidden heart, pulled at something deep. My own burnout mirrored it, nights alone replaying old rejections, the ache of hiding who I was in a world that demanded straight lines. I stepped closer, floor groaning faint. She startled, head snapping up, eyes wide and fractured in the low light, mascara smudged, hair slipping from its knot. "What are you—" Her voice cracked, hand flying to her mouth as another wave hit, chest heaving. Panic etched her face, the CEO facade crumbling to reveal the woman beneath, guarded and breaking. I knelt slow, voice low. "Breathe with me. In, out." My hand hovered, then settled on her arm, warmth seeping through her sleeve. She flinched, then leaned in, the contact grounding us both amid the dust. Words tumbled from her then, fractured confessions of pressure, the board's demands, sleepless nights blurring into one endless grind, anxiety clawing until it spilled here, in this forgotten place. I nodded, sharing fragments of my own fatigue, the isolation of preserving what others deemed worthless. The air shifted, heavy with unsaid pulls, her pulse sinking faint under my touch. As her breathing steadied, the silence between us thickened, pulling me closer. Morning started the same, coffee steam curling sharp through the archive's stale air, cutting the chill that clung to the high ceilings. I pour it black, the mug warm against my palms, and sit at the scarred oak table in my small apartment overlooking the library's back alley. Single life echoed in the quiet. Bed unmade on one side, dishes stacked from last night's solitary meal. No one to share the weight of the day ahead, just the hum of the city waking, distant horns blending with my own steady breaths. I'd linger there, steam rising like unanswered questions, before grabbing my keys and heading out. The walk to work wound through cracked sidewalks, leaves crunching under my boots, the air crisp with that early bite. By the time I pushed through the library's heavy doors, the routine gripped tight. Sorting donor files first, fingers sifting through yellowed envelopes amid the ping of budget alerts on my screen, red flags flashing like warnings. Fatigue settled like dust on my shoulders, heavy from the endless cataloging, each page a reminder of what hung in the balance. The board's memos piled up, numbers that didn't care about the stories they threatened to erase, my back aching from hours bent over crates in the dim stacks. She appeared in glimpses then, Elena, striding the halls with that sharp nod to staff, her heels clicking like judgments on marble floors. I'd catch her from the reference desk, shadowed eyes flicking over reports, the strain masked behind her clipped efficiency. Once, passing close enough to smell her faint citrus scent cutting the musty air, I saw it. A faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted her cuff, gone in a blink. It tugged at me, that hidden fracture, mirroring the isolation I'd carried for years. Personal scars surfaced in quiet moments, flashes of past judgment slicing through like cold rain. A family dinner years back, aunts narrowed eyes over my short hair and the woman I'd brought home. Whispers of unnatural choices that left silt under my skin. I'd learned to tuck it away, the queer edges folded into the margins of my life, longing for validation that stayed unseen in a world of straight lines and easy assumptions. Nights alone, I'd trace old letters in the archive, women's names intertwined in faded ink, feeling the echo of my own hidden wants. Subtle empathy built between us, without words. I'd notice her shadowed eyes lingering on the high windows during staff meetings, the way her fingers tightened on her pen when budgets came up. Unspoken isolation hanging like fog. It mirrored my own, the burnout of preserving fragments others dismissed, the ache of being overlooked. One afternoon, as rain sheeted the panes, our paths crossed in the narrow corridor near the donor room. She paused, gaze meeting mine a beat too long, something raw flickering before her nod pulled it back. The air felt thicker, charged with shared strain we didn't name. That pull lingered through the days, coffee cups cooling untouched, files blurring under fatigue. I catch myself watching for her silhouette against the light, heart thudding quiet at the thought of that basement night, her warmth under my hand. Empathy wove in slow, binding our guarded worlds without a sound. That evening, the basement called me back, footsteps echoing soft on the worn stairs, the air growing cooler with each step down. The stairs creaked under my boots, each step pulling me deeper into the basement's dim embrace. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the concrete walls, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and damp earth. It clung to my skin, thick and unyielding, like the fatigue that had settled in my bones from too many late nights sorting through stacks that no one else cared to touch. I gripped the thermos tighter, its metal warm from the tea I'd brewed upstairs, steam still faint inside. My heart thudded steady, echoing the pull from earlier that week. The glimpse of her unraveling, the way her guarded eyes had met mine before the walls snapped back up. I rounded the corner into the restricted stacks, shelves looming like silent witnesses, spines cracked and faded under layers of dust. There she was again, Elena, curled against a low shelf, knees drawn to her chest, breaths coming in ragged bursts that cut the hush. Her hands clenched the edge of a worn ledger, knuckles white, body rocking faint as if to hold itself together. The CEO's polish was gone, suit jacket discarded in a heap, blouse untucked, hair falling loose in dark strands that stuck to her neck. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mixing with the chill that raised goosebumps along her arms. She didn't hear me at first, lost in the storm inside, tremors building from her core, rippling out until her whole frame shook. I hesitated in the doorway's shadow, the air between us thick with her panic's echo. Burnout had carved lines into her face, deeper than the boardroom strain I'd glimpsed before. Eyes squeezed shut, lips pressed thin against gasps that fractured the quiet. It mirrored my own edges, the way exhaustion clawed at me after hours alone with these forgotten lives. Judgments from past lovers lingering like silt, making every breath feel borrowed. But seeing her like this, the woman who held our fates in her hands, pulled something raw from me. I stepped closer, boots soft on the grit-strewn floor, voice low as gravel. "Elena, it's me, from the other night." Her head jerked up, eyes wild and fractured, pupils blown wide in the low light. A fresh wave hit her then, chest heaving, one hand flying to her throat as if to loosen an invisible noose, words tumbling fractured. "I can't. The numbers, they won't stop spinning. Board tomorrow, everything riding on it, and I'm just breaking." Her voice cracked, sentences splintering into breaths, anxiety's grip tightening like cold fingers around her ribs. Tremors coursed through her arms, the ledger slipping to the floor with a dull thud, pages splaying open to reveal faded entries of long-lost donations. Burnout poured out in fragments. Sleepless nights blurring into mergers that demanded her soul, the isolation of the top floor where vulnerability was a weakness, her body betraying her with this relentless churn. I knelt beside her, slow, the concrete biting through my jeans. "Here." I unscrewed the thermos, pouring tea into the cap, the steam rising faint and herbal, cutting the musty air. She took it with shaking hands, sipping in small pulls, the warmth seeping in as her breaths hitched. My hand found her arm then, steady pressure through the thin fabric, my palm absorbing the chill of her skin. She flinched at first, muscles taut, but leaned into it, the contact a quiet anchor amid the panic's roar. Warmth spread from my touch, grounding us both, her pulse fluttering wild under my fingers before slowing, faint and sinking. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks, smudging the dust on her face, as confessions ebbed into quieter sobs. The anxiety's peak receded, leaving her slumped, breaths evening out against my shoulder. I stayed there, hand unmoving, the basement's hush wrapping around us like a shared secret. As her breathing steadied, the air shifted, heavy with unsaid things pulling us closer. I guided her up the stairs, my arms steady around her waist, her steps uneven against the worn wood. The basement's chill clung to us both, but her weight leaned into mine, trusting in the dim light filtering from above. We reached the reading room, its high windows casting faint moonlight across the long oak table scattered with open folios. I eased her into a chair, the leather creaking soft under her, then fetched a towel from the supply closet, rough cotton, smelling faintly of starch. She sat still as I pressed it to her forehead, dabbing away the sweat and tears that had left her skin clammy. Her eyes met mine, fractured but clearing, the warmth of the fabric seeping in like a quiet promise. I lingered there, thumb brushing her temple once, accidental, before pulling back. She wrapped her hands around the thermos cap, still half full of tea, steam curling faint between us. Words came guarded at first, fragments slipping out like pages from a loose binding. "The board's relentless," she murmured, voice low against the room's hush. "Mergers stacking up, numbers that swallow everything. Nights bleed into days and I can't shut it off." Her fingers tightened on the cup, knuckles paling, as she traced the endless grind. Decisions that isolated her on the top floor. Anxiety's churn turning sleep to fragments, burnout carving hollows under her eyes. I listened, nodding slow, the air thick with her confessions, each one peeling back the CEO's armor to reveal the woman frayed at the edges. It mirrored my own unraveling, her words pulling at threads I'd buried deep. I'd felt that same clawing fatigue, sorting through donor files until my vision blurred, the archive's weight pressing like silt after a flood. Burnout had surfaced in my quiet hours, alone with these shelves, replaying old scars, the judgments from family gatherings, aunt's sharp glances over my flannel, and the women I'd loved in shadows, their touches fleeting before the world demanded I straighten out. Her frayed edges reflected mine, the isolation of guarding what others dismissed, queer wants tucked into margins like hidden annotations. Empathy bloomed slow in that shared hush, her guarded talk drawing me in, validating the aches we'd both carried unseen. We shifted to the table then, her chair scraping faint as I pulled a fragile document from a nearby crate, an old map, edges curling like forgotten promises. My fingers brushed hers over the paper, accidental at first, the contact warm and electric against the cool vellum. Pulses synced faint under our skins, a rhythm building in the quiet, her breath evening out as we traced the faded lines together. The room's air felt charged, heavy with the scent of aged ink and her faint citrus lingering beneath. I pointed to a marginal note, a woman's script looping intimate, and her gaze followed, softening. That glance at the old love letters stirred something deeper, tucked in a nearby folio. Women's names intertwined in ink from decades past. Whispers of lives lived beyond straight lines. It tugged at my hidden wants, the longing for validation that echoed in those pages, much like the pull between us now. Her eyes held mine a beat too long, raw recognition flickering, the queer undercurrent humming unspoken in the hush. Burnout's weight eased a fraction in that shared gaze, her hand lingering near mine on the table, warmth cutting through the chill. I stayed until her color returned, the towel folded neat beside her, tea gone cold. She rose slow, suit jacket retrieved from below, but the air between us had shifted, thicker, laced with empathy that bound our guarded worlds. Days blurred after that, but her visits to the stacks grew, drawing me in deeper with each quiet step down the stairs. Office routines hummed on, the archive's steady rhythm of filing cabinets clicking shut amid the low buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I'd sift through stacks of requisitions at the reference desk, fingers smudged with ink from donor logs, the air thick with the faint rustle of pages turning in the distance. Mornings blurred into afternoons, my back curving over the scarred wood counter, fatigue settling like fine grit in the corners of my eyes. But now, small anchors appeared unexplained. A fresh coffee cup on my desk by mid-morning, steam rising black and strong, just how I took it, no note attached. It happened twice that week, the warmth seeping through the porcelain grounding me amid the budget alerts pinging sharp on my screen. I'd sip slow, tracing the rim, my thoughts drifting to her office upstairs, wondering if she'd timed it from a glance during staff briefings. Elena's thaw came in fragments, subtle as marginalia in an old text. She'd linger now during her rounds, pausing at the display cases near the entrance, her heels softening their click on the marble. "What's this one from?" she'd ask one afternoon, voice dropping lower than her boardroom clip, finger hovering over a tarnished locket in the case. Part of our queer history exhibit, a token from a women's literary circle in the 1920s. I explained the inscription, the hidden codes in their letters, and her gaze held mine a beat longer, softening at the edges, curiosity thawing the frost from her eyes. It repeated in quiet moments, questions on artifacts pulled from crates, her leaning close over faded photographs, breath warm against the cool glass. The efficiency review memos still landed heavy, but her tone shifted when we spoke. Less command, more pull, like she was tracing paths through the dust herself. That internal tug grew insistent, attraction flickering quiet like the turn of a brittle page, guarded steps keeping it tucked. I'd catch myself watching her silhouette against the high windows during breaks, the way sunlight caught the loose strands at her neck, stirring something deep, warmth uncoiling slow in my chest, echoing the hidden wants I'd buried under layers of routine. It felt risky, this pull, with the library's fate dangling and my own scars still raw from past judgments, the ache of lovers who'd faded when the world narrowed its gaze. Yet her presence drew me, empathy weaving tighter, my heart thudding faint whenever our paths crossed in the narrow halls, air thickening with unsaid things. Burnout exchanges slipped in during those lulls, her admissions surfacing like silt stirred in still water. One evening, as I locked the donor room, she appeared at the end of the corridor, arms crossed tight over her blouse. "Sleepless again," she said, voice frayed, eyes shadowed deeper than the archive's corners. "The projections won't balance in my head." I nodded, echoing back my own fragments, the nights blurring as I cataloged alone, fatigue clawing until dawn, isolation pressing like the weight of unsorted crates. No deep dives, just shared nods in the hush, her shoulders easing a fraction at the recognition, our guarded aches mirroring without words. It bound us closer, those quiet admissions cutting through the professional chill. Lines blurred in the late cataloging sessions, the archive emptying around us as we worked side by side in the tight aisles of the stacks. I'd pull volumes for her review, elbows grazing accidental in the narrow space, warmth sparking through fabric, her scent of citrus and ink lingering faint. One night, reaching for the same ledger on a high shelf, our hands brushed, fingers tangling brief over the spine, pulses sinking in the dim light. She didn't pull away first, gaze holding mine, the air heavy with the pull we didn't name. Professional edges softened there, amid the dust and faded ink. Burnout's shared weight easing in the proximity. One rain-slicked evening, the door creaked open again, pulling her back into the hush. Rain lashed the high windows that evening, sheets of it blurring the city lights into smeared halos, the archive's hush broken only by the steady drum against glass. I'd stayed late, sorting through a crate of unbound manuscripts in the donor room, fingers tracing frayed edges under the desk lamp's warm glow. The air felt charged, heavy with the storm's metallic tang seeping through cracks, my back aching from the lean over scattered pages. Footsteps echoed then, soft but urgent in the corridor, and the door creaked open, letting in a gust that scattered loose notes like startled leaves. There she stood, Elena, coat dripping onto the threshold, dark strands plastered to her cheeks, eyes shadowed deeper than the stacks below. She didn't speak at first, just crossed the room in uneven steps, water pooling at her boots, the chill clinging to her like a second skin. I rose, chair scraping faint, heart thudding quiet at the sight. Her blouse translucent under the coat, breaths coming sharp against the downpour's roar. "Elena," I said, voice low, reaching for a towel from the shelf. But she folded against the desk edge before I could, body sagging, one hand gripping the scarred oak as if it were the only solid thing left. Tremors started then, rippling from her core, anxiety's relapse hitting hard, chest heaving, free arm wrapping tight around her middle, gasps fracturing the air between us. Rain dripped from her coat in steady plinks, mixing with the sweat beading on her neck, her face paling as the panic clawed deeper, pulling her down. I moved close, arms steadying her waist, the wet fabric cold under my palms, but her warmth seeping through. She leaned heavy into me, breath shared in the hushed space, ragged at first, then sinking slow with mine. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the rhythm grounding us amid the storm's fury. My chin rested on her shoulder, her hair damp against my cheek, the scent of rain and citrus mingling sharp. "I've got you," I murmured, one hand rubbing circles on her back, feeling the knots of tension ease fraction by fraction. The desk dug into my hip, but I held firm, her body unfolding against mine, the vulnerability peak cresting into quiet sobs that shook us both. Burnout's echo thrummed in her frame, the endless board pressures spilling out in fractured whispers. Deadlines that devoured nights, isolation on the top floor where cracks weren't allowed, anxiety twisting until it snapped. We sank to the floor then, backs against the desk, her head on my shoulder, breaths evening out in the room's dim corners. The rain softened to a patter, leaving the air thick with unsaid weight. Confessions deepened there, her voice emerging guarded, words slipping like ink bleeding on wet paper. "Family silences," she said, fingers tracing patterns on my knee, absent. "Grew up in a house of straight lines. Dinners where questions about girls got stares. Flames hidden in journals under the bed." Her queer past whispered out, raw edges showing. First loves stolen in shadows, judgments from kin that carved hollows. The empire she'd built as armor against it all. Tears traced warm paths down her neck, soaking my collar, the hidden flames flickering alive in her tone. Vulnerability peeling back layers I'd only glimpsed before. It pulled my own fractures to the surface, the mutual reveal unfolding in the hush. "Judgments like silt under skin," I said, hand finding hers, palms pressing together, calluses rough against smooth. Family gatherings flashed, narrowed eyes over my flannel, and the women who'd lingered too long in my life. Whispers of choices that left scars, queer edges tucked away until they chafed. Past lovers faded under the weight. Validation sought in these shelves instead. The archives quiet, holding what the world wouldn't. Her grip tightened, pulses sinking faint through our joined hands, empathy weaving deeper in that shared unravel. No more hiding the fractures. They mirrored, binding us in the storm's aftermath. Warmth cutting through the chill. The quiet held us there, breaths mingling slow. But work's shadow loomed closer, the board's threat pressing like the rain against the panes. The board's threat escalated like floodwaters rising. Memos stacking on my desk and crisp white envelopes, each one stamped with red urgency. Sale proposals detailed in cold print. The archive's rare collections auctioned to the highest bidder. The building rezoned for luxury condos. Our history reduced to footnotes and profit margins. I sifted through them during lunch breaks, fingers tracing the fine print under the reading room's harsh light, the air thick with the scent of fresh ink and my growing dread. Whispers among staff turned to murmurs in the halls. Packing crates ordered, timelines shrinking to weeks. The fate hung heavy, pressing on my chest like the weight of unsorted volumes. Each proposal a blow to the fragments I'd guarded for years. Elena paced the corridors that week, her steps sharper, heels echoing off marble like unresolved chords. I caught her from the reference desk, arms crossed tight over her blouse, gaze distant on the high windows where rain streaked the panes. Duty pulled at her, the CEO's role demanding she sign off on the cuts. But our shared nights had cracked that armor, empathy flickering in her shadowed eyes, torn between the board's relentless push and the quiet bond we'd woven in the stacks. She'd pause near my station, fingers drumming on the counter, voice low. "They won't listen to sentiment," she'd say, conflict etching lines around her mouth, the isolation of her top-floor decisions mirroring my own burnout in the dim basements. It tugged at me, seeing her frayed, the woman who'd leaned into my touch now pacing like a caged rhythm, empathy clashing with the empire she'd built. We pushed back together, collaborative at first in stolen hours after closing. "We need proof," I said one evening, pulling her into the donor room, the door clicking shut behind us. A key historical document, an original charter tying the library to city founders, potentially irreplaceable, might sway them, buried somewhere in the restricted files. Lamps cast warm pools over the scarred table as we spread ledgers wide, fingers sifting through brittle pages, dust rising faint in the air. Her shoulder brushed mine in the tight space, warmth cutting the chill, our breaths sinking over faded script. Hours blurred, eyes straining against the yellowed ink, the storm outside drumming steady on the roof. Burnout clashed there, her exhaustion mirroring mine in the dim light, hands trembling on the files as fatigue clawed deeper, her grip slipping on a heavy tome, mine steadying it with a touch that lingered. "Can't keep this up," she murmured, voice frayed, shadows hollowing her cheeks, the endless board pressures bleeding into tremors that echoed my own late-night aches. We'd pause, foreheads nearly touching over the pages, breaths ragged from the grind, empathy binding us tighter in the hush. The archive's weight pressed, but so did the pull between us, her guarded resolve softening against my quiet anchor. Intimacy escalated slow, gazes holding longer across the table, raw and searching, the air thickening with unsaid wants. One reach for a volume tangled our fingers brief, palms pressing warm, pulses thudding faint under skin. Queer edges surfacing in that contact, validation humming unspoken. She didn't pull away, eyes darkening, the moment stretching until the room felt smaller, charged. Burnout's clash eased in those touches, her thumb tracing my knuckle once, accidental, before we bent back to the search. Discovery night deepened the pull, the charter's faint seal emerging under our joined hands, silence breaking soft with her sharp intake. The charter lay open under the lamp's glow, its wax seal cracked but intact, the ink faded to a whisper of names from the city's founding era. My fingers traced the edge, heart thudding steady as Elena leaned closer, her breath warm against my wrist. Dust mote swirled in the narrow beam, settling slow on the vellum like silt after a stir. We had pored over crates for hours, backs aching against the scarred table, the donor room's air thick with aged paper and the faint tang of her citrus lingering from the rain. Fatigue clawed at us both, eyes burning from the strain. But there it was, a ledger, tucked in the base of the last box. Spine cracked, pages yellowed, brittle. I pulled it free, the cover heavy in my hands, embossed with a family crest I didn't recognize at first. Elena's gaze sharpened, her shoulder brushing mine in the tight space, warmth seeping through our sleeves. We flipped it open together, fingers grazing accidental, pulses sinking faint under the skin. Entries scrolled in careful script. Donations from the Voss line, her line, tying back to the library's origins. Land grants. Endowments that built these walls. Queer annotations, hidden in margins. Women's signatures, looping intimate beside the men's. A great-aunt's note caught my eye. Veiled references to dear companions in the shadows of board meetings, flames banked, but burning. Her hand stilled on the page, knuckles paling against the ink. It's us. Her voice cracked low, shock rippling through her frame like a tremor in still water. Eyes widened, tracing the names, the legacy unfolding raw. Her family's straight-line empire rooted here, in the very histories she'd come to dismantle. Tears welled then, tracing silent paths down her cheeks, carving tracks through the dust that clung to her skin. She pressed a palm to her mouth, body folding forward, the CEO's resolve thawing in the dim light, walls crumbling to reveal the woman who'd hidden these roots under layers of efficiency. I watched, chest tight, the revelation pulling at my own guarded edges, empathy flooding warm as her shoulders shook. She turned to me, eyes fractured but clear, the air between us heavy with the weight of it all. No words at first, just her hand finding mine across the ledger, fingers linking tight, calluses rough against smooth. The bond solidified there, in that hush. Her lean into my space tentative, foreheads nearly touching over the pages. Warmth spread from the contact, grounding the shock. Her breath mingling with mine, ragged at first, then steadying in the room's quiet. I cupped her cheek, thumb brushing a tear's path, skin damp and soft under my touch. She closed the distance, lips brushing mine tentative, light as a page turning, tasting of salt and resolve. The kiss deepened, slow, her free hand rising to my neck, fingers threading into my hair, pulling me closer. No rush, just the slow burn peak unfolding, warmth uncoiling against the cold knot of her earlier fractures. My arms wrapped her waist, fabric whispering under palms, her body yielding soft against mine, the desk edge digging faint into my hip. Pulses thudded in sync, heat building gentle, hands exploring the curve of her back, the dip at her spine. Breaths hitching in the charged air. Queer authenticity hummed unspoken. No more hiding these edges. The legacy on the page validating the flames we'd both banked, shared in the ledger's quiet proof. Her mouth parted under mine, a soft sound escaping. The world narrowing to that touch, burnout's chill easing in the intimacy. We pulled back, eventual. Foreheads pressed, breaths ragged in the hush. Her eyes held mine, raw and open, the tears drying to faint tracks. "This changes it," she whispered, hand still clasped in mine, the Voss name staring up from the ink. Validation bloomed there, in the shared legacy, our guarded wants surfacing like annotations long overlooked. The archive's fate shifted in that moment, her resolve hardening not against us, but for the roots we'd uncovered together. Warmth lingered in her touch, binding what words couldn't, the slow peak settling into something solid, real. Dawn filtered in through the high windows, pale light cutting the shadows, reshaping our worlds in its quiet glow. The boardroom loomed that morning, its glass walls reflecting the city's sharp edges, air crisp with the scent of polished mahogany and fresh agendas. We'd prepared in hushed fragments the night before, the charter folded careful in my satchel, its weight a quiet anchor against my ribs. Elena stood beside me in the elevator ascent, her hand brushing mine once, pulses sinking faint through the fabric of our sleeves. Tension coiled in her frame, burnout's shadows lingering under her eyes, but resolve hardened her gaze, empathy forged in the stacks, pulling her forward, our shared legacy a shield against the profit-driven storm. I felt it too, the archive's fate thrumming in my chest like a held breath. Queer edges we'd uncovered, now weapons in the fray. We entered together, voices steady as the door clicked shut behind us. The board sat arrayed, suit starched and eyes measuring, projections flickering on screens with sale figures that reduced our shelves to lines on a graph. Elena took the head, her posture straight but not rigid, the CEO reclaiming her space while vulnerability hummed beneath. "This isn't just assets," she began, voice low and deliberate, sliding the charter across the table. I stood at her flank, fingers tracing the vellum's edge as she unfolded it, the seal catching the light. Names scrolled. Voss endowments, the library's roots tangled in her bloodline. Annotations whispering of hidden lives, women's bonds that defied the straight narratives they'd imposed. Gasps rippled faint, questions sharpening like pencils on notepads. But she held firm, empathy threading her words. Human histories over hollow gains, the burnout of erasing what built us all. Doubt flickered in their stares, but the evidence landed heavy, her choice crystallizing. Halting the sale, reallocating budgets to preservation, prioritizing the fragments that validated unseen struggles. "This ends here," she said, gaze sweeping the room, her hand finding mine brief under the table, warmth cutting the chill. The motion passed fractured, murmurs turning to nods, the archive's threat receding like silt settling after a rush. We exited side by side, the elevator's hum wrapping us in quiet triumph, her shoulder leaning into mine, breaths evening out in the descent. Back in the empty reading room, emotional payoff bloomed soft under the high windows, afternoon light slanting golden across the oak table. She turned to me, eyes raw and open, the board's echo fading to the archive's hush. "We did it," she whispered, stepping close, her fingers linking with mine, calluses rough from ledgers and life. No grand speeches, just quiet affirmation. Validation in her gaze, mirroring the queer authenticity we'd unearthed. Burnout's claw easing in the shared win. I pulled her in, arms wrapping her waist, her head resting on my shoulder, the scent of citrus and aged paper mingling warm. Tears pricked my eyes, not from loss, but release. The isolation we'd guarded dissolving in that hold. Future glimpses unfolded in the weeks after, shared routines weaving our days like threads in a binding. Morning started with coffee steam curling together in my apartment, mugs clinking soft as we planned exhibits, her laughter dry at my fumbling with donor logs. Burnout eased in tandem, nights no longer solitary, her hand on my back during late cataloging, pulses sinking over fragile pages, anxiety's tremors fading to faint echoes. We'd walk the stacks hand in hand after closing, fingers tracing spines, queer edges surfacing free. No hiding now, validation in every glance. The archive's quiet holding our bond as firmly as its walls. Final intimacy came one evening in the reading room, lamps casting warm pools over scattered folios. She drew me close, foreheads touching, breaths mingling slow in the hush. Silence wrapped us deepest then, deeper than words, her lips brushing mine gentle, warmth uncoiling against the chill of old scars. Hands explored soft, her fingers in my hair, mine at her neck, the world narrowing to that touch, burnout's weight lifted, shared legacy binding us whole. As the door closed behind us, the archive's hush followed, a promise kept. Our hands clasped over the preserved charter's pages, warmth lingering like dawn's first light, the ink's faded whispers sealing what we'd built. The silence we found healed what words couldn't, binding our guarded worlds in quiet truth. If this quiet pull resonates, subscribe for more hidden connections. Tell me below if you've guarded your own stories.